What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late night set expecting a conversation and instead gets ambushed by a host who forgot where the line is? In just 45 seconds, one comment turned a simple interview into the most jaw-dropping moment in talk show history. This is the night Seth Meyers learned that some guests refused to be disrespected on national television. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement. Denzel Washington, the man who had given us countless unforgettable performances, was about to sit down for what everyone assumed would be another charming late-night interview. The cameras were rolling, the band had just finished playing, and Seth Meyers was grinning from ear to ear as Denzel walked out onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. People were on their feet. Denzel waved to the crowd with that signature humble smile, the one that made him a beloved figure across generations. He shook Seth's hand and settled into the guest chair. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. "Denzel Washington, everybody," Seth announced to another round of applause. "Thank you so much for being here. Seriously, this is such an honor." "Happy to be here," Denzel replied, his voice warm and genuine. Seth leaned back in his chair, already launching into his first question. "So, you've got this new film coming out. Another powerful role. Another incredible performance, I'm sure. But I have to ask, and I think everyone wants to know, do you ever get tired of playing these serious, intense characters? Do you ever just want to do something fun?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Denzel's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something passing across his face. But he remained composed. Professional. "Well, Seth, I choose roles that speak to me. Roles that mean something. I think that's what an actor's job is. To tell stories that matter." Right, of course," Seth said, nodding quickly. But there was something in his tone. Something dismissive. "But come on, you've been doing this for decades. The same type of character over and over. The dignified hero. The moral compass. Don't you ever want to just let loose? Maybe do a comedy? Play a fool?" The audience laughed, but it was an uncomfortable laugh. The kind of laugh that happens when people aren't sure if what they're hearing is a joke or something else entirely. Denzel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I don't see my work as repetitive, Seth. Each character I play is different. Each story has its own purpose." Sure, Seth interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "But let's be honest. You've built this whole image, this untouchable persona. The wise man, the mentor. It's a bit limiting, don't you think? I mean, how much range can you really show when you're always playing the same note?" The studio went quiet. Dead quiet. Even the crew members behind the cameras exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't the playful banter audiences expected. This was something else. Denzel leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Seth. "I'm not sure what you're trying to say here." "I'm just saying," Seth continued, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe you've gotten comfortable. Maybe you've stopped challenging yourself. I mean, when was the last time you really surprised anyone with a role? When was the last time you took a real risk?" The words landed like a slap. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was an attack. Denzel took a slow breath. When he spoke, his voice was calm but firm. "Seth, I've been in this industry for over 40 years. I've worked with some of the greatest directors and actors in the world. I've told stories about real people, real struggles. I've never once phoned it in or taken the easy route. So I'm going to ask you to reconsider what you just said." But Seth wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed emboldened by the tension. "Oh, come on. Don't get defensive. I'm just asking the questions everyone's thinking. You've won your Oscars. You've got your legacy. But aren't you just coasting now? Playing it safe?" The audience gasped. A few people even booed. This had crossed a line, and everyone in the room knew it. Denzel's expression hardened. "Playing it safe? Is that what you think I do? I think you do what gets you the easy applause, Seth shot back, his tone dripping with condescension. You play the characters that make people feel good about themselves. The inspiring teacher, the noble soldier. It's predictable. Predictable, Denzel repeated, his voice low. You're calling my life's work predictable. I'm calling it what it is, Seth said with a shrug. Look, no offense, but when was the last time you really stretched yourself as an actor? When was the last time you played someone messy? Someone flawed? Someone real? Denzel's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. His composure was beginning to crack, not out of anger, but out of sheer disbelief at what he was hearing. Every character I've played has been real, Denzel said, his words measured but forceful. Every person I've portrayed has had depth and complexity. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Seth laughed. Actually laughed. Come on, Denzel. You're a great actor. Nobody's denying that. But let's not pretend you're Daniel Day-Lewis. You've found your lane, and you've stayed in it. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's call it what it is. The comparison stung. The audience could see it. Denzel's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Something that said this interview was about to take a turn. You want to compare me to other actors? Denzel asked, his voice quiet but intense. You want to sit here and diminish what I've accomplished? On your show? In front of these people? I'm not diminishing anything, Seth said, though his smug expression suggested otherwise. I'm just being honest. And honestly, I think you've been playing it safe for years. You've built this reputation as this untouchable figure, but when you really look at your recent work, it's all the same. Same energy, same gravitas, same Denzel. Same Denzel, Denzel echoed, shaking his head slowly. You know what, Seth? I came here tonight because I thought we'd have a conversation. A respectful conversation. But what you're doing right now, this isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. This is disrespect. Disrespect? Seth scoffed. I'm asking you tough questions. Isn't that what interviews are supposed to be? Or do you only want people to kiss your feet and tell you how amazing you are? The audience was no longer laughing. Some people were shouting at Seth to stop. Others were simply sitting in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Denzel stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, controlled fury that was far more powerful than any outburst could have been. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's trying to make a name for themselves at my expense, Denzel said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. And that's exactly what you're doing right now. Seth's smirk faltered for the first time. Denzel, come on, sit down. We're just talking. No, Denzel said firmly. We're not just talking. You're attacking me. You're attacking my work, my integrity. And I'm not going to sit here and let you do that. You're being too sensitive, Seth said, trying to regain control of the situation. This is a comedy show. We joke around. We push buttons. That's what we do. There's a difference between pushing buttons and being disrespectful, Denzel shot back. And you crossed that line the moment you questioned my dedication to my craft. Seth stood up as well now, clearly flustered. Look, if I offended you, I apologize. But you have to admit, I'm not wrong. You've been playing the same types of roles for years. You don't get to tell me what I've been doing with my career, Denzel said, his voice rising slightly. You sit behind this desk and make jokes for a living. I've dedicated my entire life to this art form. I've studied. I've trained. I've worked harder than you could ever imagine. And you have the audacity to stand here and call my work predictable? The crew members were frozen. No one knew what to do. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't supposed to happen. Denzel, please. Seth tried again, his voice losing its earlier confidence. Let's just take a breath and talk about this. I don't want to talk about this, Denzel said, his tone final. I came here to promote my film, to have a conversation about something I care deeply about. But instead, you decided to use this platform to tear me down, to make yourself feel important by diminishing someone else. That's not what I was doing, Seth protested weakly. Yes, it is, Denzel countered. That's exactly what you were doing. And the sad part is, you don't even realize it. You think you're being clever. You think you're being edgy. But really, you're just being cruel. The word cruel hung in the air. It was the perfect description of what had just transpired. Seth had been cruel, and everyone in that studio knew it. I've worked with the best, Denzel continued, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. I've learned from the best. I've given everything I have to every single role I've ever played, and I don't need to justify that to you or anyone else. Seth opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel held up a hand. No, Denzel said. You've said enough. More than enough. I'm not going to stand here and defend myself to someone who clearly doesn't respect what I do. I do respect you, Seth insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. I've always respected you. Then you have a funny way of showing it, Denzel replied coldly. The audience was completely silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Denzel looked out at the crowd, his expression softening slightly. I'm sorry you all had to witness this, he said to them. This isn't what any of us signed up for tonight. Then he turned back to Seth, his gaze hardening once more. And as for you, Seth, I hope you take a long look at yourself after this. Because what you did tonight, that's not hosting. That's not entertainment. That's just ego. With that, Denzel began to remove his microphone. His hands moved deliberately, carefully, as he unclipped it from his jacket and placed it on the chair. Denzel, wait, Seth pleaded, panic evident in his voice now. Don't leave. We can fix this. We can start over. There's nothing to fix, Denzel said simply. You showed me exactly who you are tonight, and I'm not interested in giving you another chance to disrespect me. Seth moved toward him, reaching out as if to physically stop him. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain. Denzel stepped back, maintaining his distance. There's nothing to explain. You made your choices. You said what you said. Now I'm making mine. This is going to look terrible, Seth said, his voice rising with frustration. For both of us. That's your concern, not mine, Denzel replied. I can sleep at night knowing I walked away from a situation where I wasn't being treated with basic respect. Can you? The question lingered. Seth didn't have an answer. He just stood there, watching helplessly as one of the biggest stars in Hollywood prepared to walk off his show. You're making a huge mistake, Seth tried one last time. Do you know how this is going to look? People are going to think you can't take criticism. Denzel paused, turning back to face Seth one final time. Criticism is fine. I welcome criticism. But what you did tonight wasn't criticism. It was an ambush. You didn't want to have a conversation. You wanted to provoke me, to get a reaction. Well, congratulations. You got one. That's not fair, Seth protested. I was just trying to have an interesting interview. Something different. Different? Denzel's voice was incredulous. You think insulting your guests is different? You think attacking someone's life's work is interesting? That's not different, Seth. That's just sad. The words hit their mark. Seth's face flushed red, whether from anger or embarrassment. It was hard to tell. I've been doing this show for years, Seth said defensively. I know what I'm doing. Maybe you used to, Denzel replied quietly. But tonight, you forgot something important. You forgot that the people who sit in this chair are human beings. We're not punching bags for your entertainment. We're not props for your comedy bits. We're people, and we deserve to be treated as such. The camera operators were still filming. Every second of this confrontation was being captured. The producers were probably losing their minds in the control room, but no one dared interrupt what was happening on stage. "I'm leaving now," Denzel announced, his voice calm and resolute, "and I won't be coming back." "You're really going to do this?" Seth asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "You're going to walk off my show?" "I'm not walking off your show," Denzel corrected him. "I'm walking away from disrespect. There's a difference." With that, Denzel Washington turned and began walking toward the exit. His steps were measured, dignified. He didn't storm off. He didn't slam anything. He simply left. And somehow, that quiet exit was more powerful than any dramatic gesture could have been. Seth stood alone on the stage, watching him go. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or remain silent. Most chose silence, too shocked by what they'd just witnessed to react. "Denzel, come on," Seth called out weakly. But it was too late. Denzel had already disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the host standing there, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. The band didn't play. The audience didn't cheer. There was just an uncomfortable, suffocating silence that filled the studio. Seth turned to face the cameras, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of the interview. "Well, that was unexpected," he said, attempting a laugh that came out hollow and forced. "We're going to take a quick break." But no one was buying it. The damage was done. Everyone in that studio, everyone watching at home, had just seen a masterclass in dignity and self-respect. They'd seen a man refuse to be diminished. They'd seen someone stand up for themselves when it would have been easier to just sit there and take it. And they'd seen a host who'd let his ego write checks his show couldn't cash. As the cameras finally cut away, Seth sank back into his chair, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a heavy blanket. His staff rushed onto the stage, some trying to comfort him, others already on their phones, no doubt dealing with the fallout that was about to explode across social media and news outlets. But backstage, Denzel Washington was already gone. He'd walked out of the building with his head held high, his dignity intact, and his reputation stronger than ever. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own humiliation. The interview that was supposed to be a promotional stop on a press tour had become something else entirely. A moment where one man's refusal to compromise his self-respect resonated far more than any scripted banter ever could. Seth had wanted an interesting interview. He'd wanted to create a moment. And he had. Just not the kind he'd hoped for. Because in trying to make himself look clever at someone else's expense, he'd instead revealed his own insecurities and lack of professionalism. He'd shown the world that beneath the jokes and the charm, there was an entitled host who believed he could say whatever he wanted without consequences, and Denzel had shown him otherwise. The studio audience slowly began to file out, their excited chatter from before replaced with subdued conversations about what they'd just witnessed. Some were angry at Seth. Others were simply confused. But everyone agreed on one thing. They'd just seen something they would never forget. In the green room, Denzel's publicist was already fielding calls. But Denzel himself seemed remarkably calm. He hadn't lost his temper. He hadn't raised his voice beyond what was necessary to be heard. He'd simply stated his truth and walked away. And that, perhaps, was the most devastating response he could have given. Seth remained on stage long after the cameras stopped rolling, replaying the conversation in his mind, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong. But the truth was, it had gone wrong from the very first question, from the moment he decided to attack rather than engage, from the second he'd let his ego convince him that tearing down a legend would somehow elevate his own status. It wouldn't. It hadn't. And now, he had to live with the consequences of his choices. The crew began breaking down the set for the night, their usual post-show chatter absent. Everyone was too aware of what had just happened, too conscious of the fact that they'd been witness to something that would define the show and this host for years to come. Because this wasn't just a bad interview. This was a turning point, a moment that revealed character, both Denzel's and Seth's, and the contrast couldn't have been more stark. One man had shown grace under pressure, strength in the face of disrespect, a willingness to walk away, rather, than compromise his principles. The other had shown arrogance, a lack of awareness, an entitled attitude that assumed he could say whatever he wanted without repercussions. And in the end, it was clear who had won this confrontation. Not through aggression or volume, but through dignity and quiet strength. Denzel Washington had walked onto that stage as a respected actor. He walked off as something more, a symbol of self-respect, a reminder that no amount of fame or success obligates you to tolerate disrespect. That sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the decision to leave. And Seth Meyers learned a lesson that every host should already know. Respect your guests, or risk losing far more than just an interview. The night ended not with applause or laughter, but with the echo of footsteps walking away. And those footsteps would reverberate far beyond that studio, far beyond that night, reminding everyone who heard the story that dignity is not negotiable and respect is not optional. This was the night one man's refusal to be diminished became a moment that transcended television, a moment that reminded us all that we have the power to walk away from situations that don't serve us, that we don't have to justify our worth to people who've already decided not to see it. Denzel Washington had come to promote a film. Instead, he'd given everyone watching a far more valuable lesson. And Seth Meyers had wanted to create a viral moment. He'd succeeded, just not in the way he'd intended. Because the moment that went viral wasn't a clever exchange or a funny bit. It was a masterclass in self-respect. And that was worth far more than any rehearsed comedy segment could ever be. The lights in the studio dimmed. The audience was gone. The cameras were off. But the impact of what had happened would last far longer than any of them could have imagined. Because on this night, in this studio, one man had drawn a line. And in doing so, he'd reminded all of us where our own lines should be drawn too. That's the power of standing up for yourself. That's the impact of refusing to participate in your own diminishment. And that's the legacy of the night Denzel Washington walked off Seth Meyers' show, leaving behind a host who'd learned the hard way that some people simply refuse to be disrespected, no matter how big the platform or how bright the lights.